From betraying his closest friend to ruining the career of a cat he's never met for fun, and even making a Marine Admiral piss his plant pants. Redhead Shanks' pirating career can be more accurately described as career ending for anyone unfortunate enough to cross paths with him. So how is one of the most wholesome men in all of the One Piece also simultaneously one of the most alarming and ruthless monsters to have ever sailed the Grand Line? Well, let's start in the early days with his one-time best friend Buggy the Clown. When we're first introduced to said Buggy, he seems like he has an extremely petty jealousy against Shanks, and to be perfectly honest, I do think that was Oda's plan at the time. However, as the series went on, it evolved, and Buggy has become a lot more sympathetic while Shanks has become much more morally questionable. When they were both serving as apprentices on Goldie Roger's ship, Shanks was the child with more potential, so much more potential that Buggy couldn't even hope to compete, and so Buggy actually gave up on his dream in favor of supporting Shanks and trusting him to make that dream come true for both of them. He put himself in a very compromising position. Now, was that Shanks' fault? No, not really. This is more of a show of weak will from Buggy. But what Buggy did instead was believe in Shanks. Throughout their time on Roger's vessel, Shanks was gearing up to take the next generation by storm, and he vowed that he would one day take his own ship to Laugh Tale with Buggy. But then, on the darkest day of clown life, when Roger was executed, all Buggy had left was Shanks and that promise that they would take a ship to Laugh Tale, and when confronted about that, Shanks replied, "I've changed my mind. For now, I don't feel like trying to get there." And this is the second time that Shanks shattered Buggy's dream. The first, again, not Shanks' fault. However, Buggy then entrusted his dream in Shanks in the same sort of way that the Straw Hats entrust their dreams into Luffy. But to that trust, Shanks said, "Nah, don't really want to do it anymore, lol." And I'm sure that Shanks has a good reason for saying this, probably something to do with what Roger told him immediately after returning from Laugh Tale, which is a very interesting thing that we still don't know yet. But as presented to us, it's a bit of a dick move. And Shanks didn't elaborate on why, leaving Buggy with absolutely nothing, having now lost his dream twice, and so Buggy proceeded to live out the next 2 decades picking up the broken fragments of his dream, stagnating in East Blue and getting kicked in the balls by a child that Shanks inspired. Only furthering Buggy's victimhood here, because he's been harmed by Shanks not once, not twice, but thrice. Although to Buggy's credit, he is no longer a victim and has now declared his ambition to become the Pirate King. But most people would never recover from what he's been through. Case in point, Who's Who is most people, and he was a child prodigy. From the moment he could walk, he began training for a career in the illustrious Cypherpol organization, the secretest of agents of the world government. And Who's Who was so incredibly gifted that he was accepted into CP9, the highest and most secretive cell before CP0 was revealed. But Who's Who was on the path to becoming one of the greatest agents in world government history, until one day he was met with a scarlet surprise. Somewhere between 12 to 13 years ago, Who's Who was entrusted with the incredibly important mission of guarding the Gomu Gomu no Mi during a world government transport. Now this of course happens to be Luffy's devil fruit, or at least it would be the secret sun god fruit, and the one that the world government had spent centuries and centuries trying to acquire, and now it was finally within their grasp. So of course they'd send their most promising of agents to guard it. However, one Shanks and X amount of his crew members, where X is the number of crew members he had at the time, were also on the hunt for this fatesome fruit, and so Shanks ordered Lucky Roux to retrieve the fruit, which he did flawlessly, I may add. And this act not only ruined Who's Who's entire career, but he was subsequently imprisoned for life for his failure on this mission. However, Who's Who did manage to escape, and so he became a pirate, living a life on the run and eventually becoming a Toby Roppo, serving under Emperor of the Sea Kaido. A rather brutal consolation prize compared to the clean and pristine career that he was set up for before that filthy Shanks walked into his life. And these days, Who's Who is like the high school football jock who watches his old matches and says that he could have gone pro if not for that unfortunate knee condition. You know, they used to say that I had just as much potential as the genius Rob Lucci. It's sad. It's just sad. Although the funny thing about this case is that Shanks ruined this man's life without ever even needing to meet him in person. And despite the fact that it was Lucky Roux who did the deed, the world government who punished him, and Luffy who mocks him to this day by using this fruit, Who's Who acknowledges that his primary grudge is against red-haired Shanks. As is the grudge of our next victim, Garp the Hero, who charges Shanks with the crime of corrupting his grand spawn. Considering they're both such crazily world-renowned figures, it's insane that we don't see this Garp-Shanks dynamic more often. But Garp has had exactly 2 thoughts regarding our Shanks. The first was when confronting Luffy's ambition on Water 7. This is all because of that red-headed idiot filling you with stupid ideas, you moron. on. And Luffy insists that he always wanted to become a pirate, but that's impossible for us to verify at the moment. We've never seen any of Luffy's life prior to Shanks, but whether he inspired the core idea or not, Shanks was definitely the one who equips Luffy with the will, the drive, and the stylish hat to become a pirate. And I cannot overstate how much this completely shattered Garp's existence. His dream was for Luffy to become the quote, strongest Navy man ever. And Oda even did an illustration for One Piece magazine showing what life would have been like in this alternate universe where Luffy, Ace, and Sabo became Marines. And Garp, he does look admittedly pretty incredibly evil in this image, but it's also probably the most genuinely happy he's ever looked in any One Piece media, because this right here, this is living the dream. Raising 3 stalwart pillars of justice who in this universe almost certainly would have gone on to become the 3 Marine Admirals. Until Shanks, Shanks, he ruined everything. So you can imagine that things got a little bit tense when Shanks arrived at Marineford. Shanks? He's the one who dragged Luffy into the life of piracy. Shanks. Which is an interesting reaction, as I think this implies that up until this moment, Garp had never even met Shanks. This is the first time he's seeing Shanks in person, and mate, he is not happy. I guess this is another case of Shanks' victim by distance, because Garp, he has a very complicated, albeit non-tangible relationship with Shanks. As Shanks was the apprentice of Goldie Roger, Garp's greatest of rival, but a man he respected so much that he even agreed to protect Roger's son. So there is probably a begrudging respect for Shanks lingering somewhere underneath all of that parental rage that makes the situation that much more complicated. But if Shanks got the best of even the strongest Marine to have ever lived, then no one is safe. And no one is exactly how I describe this next man, because Shanks' victims date all the way back to the dawn of One Piece, and in fact our very first series victim was a Shanks victim, and that would be Higuma the Bear. Just your local 8 million berry bandit strolling into the pub after a long day of shaking people down for scraps, and all he wants to do is feel that ice cold drop of booze on his bandit lips. But then this prick up and drinks all of the alcohol in the bar before Higuma even has the chance to walk in. Now Higuma, he's something of a prick himself, so we tend to forgive Shanks for this, but it's not very socially conscious to say the least. Because Makino's bar isn't the private stash of the red hair pirates, it needs to supply the entire village, and Shanks went and sucked it all up like the red-headed booze Kirby he is. It's definitely not what a hero would do, and certainly a key inspiration for Luffy not wanting to be a hero, because he also has no desire to share. Shanks himself even says that he feels kind of guilty for hogging everything, but at the same time not guilty enough to wipe away that sly, tipsy smile. And then of course this leads to a series of events that ruins Higuma's entire business enterprise and even claims his life. And again, I don't feel too bad for Higuma losing his life, as he himself claims that he's killed 56 people, which is Gomu people, and it's kind of funny because the one person he failed to kill was Luffy, an actual Gomu person. But also this is one case where Shanks didn't come away completely unscathed either. In fact, he was very scathed. In this scenario, Shanks drank himself so legless that he ended up rather armless. But it just goes to show that everywhere Shanks goes creates more victims, sometimes even including himself. And for such a war-adverse man, he's certainly not shy about creating conflict for the sake of a good time. And speaking of a good time, 2 years ago, a man by the name of Kaido set sail for a lovely vacation where he was planning on visiting the war resort of Marineford to fight both Whitebeard and the world government to create the greatest conflict this planet had ever seen. This was a holiday that Kaido had booked for months in advance, and Shanks predictably ruined everything again. We still don't know the specifics of how this went down, but when Kaido and his forces set sail, he was intercepted by Shanks and the red hair pirates, who did a thing, and that thing caused Kaido to turn around and go home. We don't even know if Kaido came into direct conflict with Shanks, and if he didn't, that actually makes this even worse, because all Kaido wanted was a nice lovely fight to the death of his opponents, and Shanks probably couldn't even give him that. Shanks is so incredibly skilled at destroying people's dreams and desires, and we're going to see 2 more examples of that very shortly. But we have Buggy, Who's Who, Garp, and now even Kaido falling victim to Shanks's shankery and having their future dreams stolen from them by a man in paisley shorts. But in Kaido's case especially, this is a huge insult, because Shanks isn't just his equal as an Emperor of the Sea. To Kaido, Shanks is his junior. He is below him, and yet Shanks is the one who gets to dictate his ambition. Shanks chastised Kaido and kept him holed up on water, just sitting there waiting to be beaten by the man who Shanks inspired to become a pirate. How obscenely humiliating that is for you, Kaido. Although I do think that Kaido made it out of this world with a bit more pride than Shanks' next victim, which is also one related. After the raid on Onigashima, a new admiral, Mr. Ryokugyu, got a bit overly excited and flower zoomed himself all the way up the waterfall to inform everyone that they had no human rights and then plant a lovely garden. To this day, I think this is the greatest demonstration of Shanks' abilities, because this is a Marine admiral we're talking about. They're effectively the pinnacle of power in this world, and Shanks' mate. Shanks was casually sailing past Wano, felt the presence of this admiral causing a bit of a mess, and then Shanks projected a jolt of Conqueror's Haki, which the admiral felt immediately and retreated, almost certainly soiling his planned pants on the way home. Shanks didn't actually need to do anything. He had Ryokugyu cowering at the thought of Shanks taking action against him. And I do think that Ryokugyu has been one of Shanks' biggest victims because his reputation in the One Piece fanbase still has yet to recover from this incident. It was so shameful to see an admiral acting this way, especially after we've seen cases of Sakazuki taking on Whitebeard one-on-one, and even Kizaru offering to fight against both Big Mom and Kaido. And that's why Ryokugyu is a bit of a joke in the One Piece fanbase. He simply doesn't, he doesn't have the aura that every other admiral possesses, and that is entirely thanks to Shanks. However, we then have the most famous victim of Shanks, the one that I personally bring up the most frequently, and that would be Eustace Captain Kidd, who after this encounter became known as Junkyard Shanks, Useless Cabin Mid, Under DC, and an ever-growing list of other fun derogatory names. So here's the thing about Kidd. Unlike every other person in this video, other than Buggy, I guess, Kidd is a double victim of Shanks. During the time skip, Eustace Kidd and his kindergarten of kidlets encountered the red hair pirates in an act of deliberate hostility, and it resulted in Kidd losing his left arm, which I should point out was not a result of Shanks directly, but this arm was actually taken by first mate Ben Beckman. Still, this led to Kidd developing a long-standing grudge against Shanks, and he would leap back into battle combat at the very first opportunity he received, which is when his crew was sailing to Elbaf and opened fire on Shanks' Grand Fleet, after which point Shanks had had enough and proceeded to obliterate Eustace Kidd in a single attack, which also led to the destruction of the Victoria Punk, Kidd's flagship vessel, and left Kidd's dream to sink to the bottom of the ocean just like Kidd and the rest of his crew. Something to remember about this event is that Kidd's bounty at this point was 3 billion berries, and that had so much more insult to injury. To think that a 3 billion berry man was one shot is utter insanity. Although, to be fair, Ryokugyu's cross-guild bounty is 3 crowns, which equates to 3 billion berries, so this is actually the second 3 billion berry victim that this absolute menace of a redhead has dispatched with no difficulty whatsoever. I do think the Kidd comes out of this looking slightly better than Ryokugyu, if only because people didn't have high expectations of Kidd going into this. It's really difficult to destroy a reputation that never existed. But even so, Shanks, he found a way. Which brings us to the latest victim of Shanks, our beloved Bartolomeo. And after hearing everything else in this video, you'd naturally wonder what could possibly possess someone to antagonize Shanks and do something like, say, burning his Jolly Roger, commandeering one of his islands, and setting up a Straw Hat merchandise stand. Well, Bartolomeo was wondering the same thing when his actions finally caught up with him. Shanks promptly arrived and reduced Bartolomeo to tears over this incident, making him admit that he messed up badly. And then Shanks did the worst possible thing, which was to give Bartolomeo this sliver of hope and allow him to leave the island. Shanks seemingly allowed the Barto Club to escape. However, before they could get too far, Yasop fired a single shot and obliterated the going Luffy senpai, giving Bartolomeo the full Eustace Kidd treatment and leaving his crew to whatever fate the sea god has in store for them. And if I was any other character in this series right now, I'd be praying to said sea god and giving lots of offerings, because if you are unfortunate enough to encounter Shanks, this man is going to end you, and you are going to need all of the divine intervention that you can get.